Welcome to The Pick List, the podcast for curious food industry minds. I'm Julia Glotz, a writer, editor and consultant specialising in food and drink. Every week, I'm joined by an expert guest to discuss the news, trends and developments shaping food and grocery retail right now. You'll get a personal perspective on how business leaders and leading thinkers from different parts of our industry are making sense of the big issues. My guests will also share what's on their personal reading list, bringing you a curated selection of thought-provoking articles from the trade press, national media and other titles. You can find links to all the articles and suggestions for further reading in the episode show notes and also on thepicklist.co.uk. Now let's start the show. Hello and welcome to episode 48 of The Pick List. I hope you're having a good week. I'm starting this episode with a quick plug. I'm hosting a masterclass on D2C and food and drink subscriptions for the grocer at the start of November with a great panel of experts, including from Simply Cook and Oddbox. I know it's going to be a very interesting discussion, lots of great insight on how to make D2C work in the wake of COVID. So if that's something you're looking at within your own business, I think you'll find it really useful. It's free and I'll put the registration link in the show notes. As it happens, my guest this week actually has built up a very successful D2C side to their business. I'm joined this week by Adam Sopher, who is co-founder and director of Joe Seph's, the gourmet popcorn brand. One of the things that's really interesting about Joe Seph's is that they do a mind-bogglingly large number of flavours. It's about 80, as Adam tells me. And they were actually looking to trim that portfolio before the pandemic to make the range a bit more manageable. But then COVID happened, and actually what they found is that having that variety and breadth ended up working really well for them in D2C because it gave them that point of difference and excitement. And because of Joe Seph's operational model, and particularly the fact that they don't outsource their manufacturing, they've been able to ride that wave and make this incredibly broad range work for them. And that's just one of the many things I talk to Adam about. We talk about health and what it's like being an indulgent brand in the era of HFSS. Adam's got some really interesting thoughts on that. The launch of an exciting new collaboration with the James Bond film franchise that they've just announced, and why Adam loves retail tech and is excited about that new Tesco checkout free store. So all of that is coming up in a moment, but first let me bring you up to speed on some of the big food and grocery retail stories this week. I've already mentioned Tesco's checkout free store, but that is one of the big stories this week. We'll come back to that in the discussion with Adam in a moment. But Tesco's opened its first checkout free store. It's called Get Go. It's in Holborn in London, and shoppers are basically able to check into the store, pick up products and then leave without scanning products or using an in-store till, very much like those Amazon Fresh checkout free stores we're already familiar with. The UK has agreed a free trade deal with New Zealand, which will see tariffs removed from a range of goods. The government said the deal will cut costs for UK exporters, but the National Farmers Union has raised concerns it will actually open the doors to lots more food imports, which could hurt UK farmers and lower standards. With COP26 just around the corner, the UK government also published its strategy for achieving net zero. The strategy contains policies to support low-carbon farming, accelerating food waste collection for all households, and a new investment fund to support agricultural innovation. It doesn't address dietary changes, which has raised some eyebrows, particularly because there were reports that proposals around reducing meat consumption were initially included, but later deleted. Morrison's shareholders approved its £7 billion takeover by US private equity group Clayton, Dubilier and Rice. The deal now has to be okayed by a court next week, which is a formality, and then the new owners take charge of Morrison's on the 27th of October. Unilever became the latest FMCG giant to warn about food inflation. The company said it's having to raise prices on its products to cope with elevated levels of cost inflation. It made the announcement while reporting its latest quarterly financial results and said it was expecting inflation to continue into next year. The retail recruitment drive for the festive season is now in full swing. Asda this week announced it was looking to recruit 15,000 temporary Christmas staff. This includes 1,500 home delivery drivers. M&S is also recruiting. It's looking for 12,000 seasonal staff to work in stores from early December. Meanwhile, Sainsbury's has already announced its biggest ever seasonal recruitment push. A while ago, it said it was looking to fill 22,000 roles this year. Gorillas, the Berlin-based rapid grocery delivery platform that's also operating in the UK, has raised $1 billion in a new funding round, which now values the business at $2.1 billion. The deal has been hailed as a sign that investor interest in the rapid delivery sector is showing no sign of slowing down. Pret is going head-to-head with Costa in the coffee vending market. It's trialling self-service coffee-to-go stations called Pret Express, which can make 21 different drinks recipes and take cashless payments. And in another product first, Lindt is moving into hot chocolate for the first time. The Swiss confectionery company has launched a luxury hot chocolate powder which is expected to compete with Cadbury's hot chocolate range in store. The new Lindt product costs £4 for 300 grams and has secured listings with Tesco and Ocado, among others. Those are some of the big food and grocery retail headlines this week. You can find links to everything I mentioned in the show notes and also on thepicklist.co.uk. And now, here's my conversation with Adam Sopher. Adam, welcome to the Picklist. Thank you for being my guest.
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting us on.
Now, you are co-founder of Joe Seph's, the gourmet popcorn brand that many listeners will be familiar with. How does one end up co-founding a gourmet popcorn brand? Just tell us a bit about how that happened.
It is a bit odd, isn't it? So the backstory to Joe Seph's is we started the business in 2010, and we being myself, my dad, my mum and my brother, so proper family unit. And it came from my dad, whose name is Joe Seph, so the brand Joe Seph's is literally his name split into two. For years made us popcorn as when we were kids, and he was inspired by different popcorns he sort of tried around the world, but always, he's not a chef by training, but always thought, I'll try and make something that tastes better and uses all natural ingredients in my own kitchen. And over the years, he had a busy sort of job and career in totally random electrical industry. And over the years, he kind of developed and played with different recipes and creating popcorn using a totally different way to how popcorn traditionally was made. And then in 2010, he'd been retired a few years. I was bored in the job that I was doing in the career. My mum had been a stay-at-home mum, and my brother had just graduated. And we thought, well, let's take these recipes that my dad had made and take them to a food show, come up with a brand and some packaging, and see what people think of it. And we turned up at a food show end of October 2010 with a limited amount of popcorn that we had made the previous day, and said, if it goes well, we'll launch, and if we won't, we won't. And by the end of the second day of the 3-day show, we sold out, and there was a huge buzz about the kind of different flavours and salted caramel popcorn, almond popcorn. We had a goat cheese and black pepper, which at the time there wasn't a popcorn category at all, so it was quite radical. And that was the beginning. That was the start of Joe Seph's. And now, 11 years later, we have been really fortunate to grow our range, grow our team, grow our brand, and really proud of everything that the whole team have done.
It's a fantastic story. So did you find yourselves in a position where once on day 2 you realised, actually, we're onto something, this is potentially going to work? Did you then have to do essentially like a crash course on how to work in the food industry, how to run a food company? How did you sort of get up to speed on things? Did you have some guidance, some people who helped you along the way, or was it all self-taught?
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, at the time, podcasts didn't really exist. There weren't really, the food industry wasn't kind of sexy. The Dragon's Den thing hadn't really landed. Not even sure if it was around at that point in time. And so there wasn't really any kind of seminars that you could go to and hear from inspirational speakers, or there was nothing. Today it's totally different in terms of what's out there. It's brilliant. And so at the time it was really, what do we do? You Google and you go, I need to do a health and safety food safety course. You do one of those online, because the difference with Joe and Seph's is we never outsourced our manufacturing. We always made it and make it still. And so we had to make sure that our production was food safe, and we were taking the right kind of process, put the right processes in place. So we learned a lot about that. And then it was really slightly naively kind of going, well, how do we want to get this into Selfridges, Harrods and Harvey Nichols. These are the premium places that we saw it in at the time. And so you sort of email the buyer going, everyone loves our popcorn, quite naive. And we think you would too. Can we send you some? And send some. And eventually, through persistence and kind of right place, right time a little bit, we were lucky enough to get a listing with Selfridges. And and over the course of the years, there's been some great people in the industry who have sort of, the other founders are, everyone's quite giving of their time, and definitely people who have kind of coaxed us along the way and pointed us in the right direction. But a lot of it, has been very much self-taught, and also from recruiting great people who have come in and brought some fantastic experience and ideas to the table.
And on that point of recruiting people, and you've already said, you guys have obviously grown considerably over the past 11 years. Can you just give us a sense of how big the brand is now? How big's the team? What are some of the big listings you guys have now?
In terms of listings, we are in places like Waitrose and Ocado, Sainsbury's seasonally at the moment, but we're much stronger in non-grocery. So we're nationwide in most cinema groups, on airlines such as Emirates, on board, where you are in fantastic hotels and bars. And then we also have a huge kind of gifting side to the business as well, where you'll find our products in kind of all sorts of different places, from John Lewis to kind of online retailers as well. So, and then outside of the UK, we're in 19 countries around the world now, everywhere from kind of big grocers in the US to huge retailers in China and lots in between. So the brand's growing quite considerably. We'll do roughly, we're about £8 million size business now, and the team, because we manufacture, is quite large. So we're a group of about 65, 70 people. But actually in the office, our core team of office-based people, so marketing, sales and finance and ops, is only around 20 people. So 15 to 20 people. So it feels like a very small business still, and because it really is. But actually, as a brand, we've grown quite a bit over the years, and but in particular, our big pool of people is in the people who make it and pack it and warehouse it and all the good fun stuff.
And I feel like you can't really talk to any food brand or anyone in food manufacturing at the moment and not talk about some of the shortages around recruitment and staff.
Yeah.
Have you guys been affected by this? How have you found recruitment and sort of incentivizing and holding on to people in the current climate?
It's definitely harder than it ever has been in our 11 years. Just to kind of give you an idea, we're based in Park Royal in northwest London, surrounded by lots of fantastic kind of other food manufacturers and other exciting businesses. And it's kind of got to a slightly silly stage of people sort of pinching people from kind of across the road and all this sort of thing. So certainly, kind of from an operational perspective, I think people in as they kind of progress through a business are a bit more considered about their job moves. But it's certainly more challenging than it ever has been. We've had a lot of people in our team who are kind of younger, who moved from various parts of the UK into London to work, have decided that they want to move home permanently to whichever part of the country they've kind of come from. And interestingly, with that group of people, none of them, even if you offer them a full-time work from home role, wouldn't want that. A lot of people still want the office interaction, and so unfortunately, that's meant that we've lost a good number of really great people. Even if we want, even offering kind of full-time work from home, doesn't land. So I think there's been a huge amount of churn, I think, in a lot of great businesses up and down the country as people kind of reassess their life situation and where they want to live. And yeah, certainly from a lack of lorry drivers, the lack of everything is starting to has been certainly very challenging. All of it's manageable, but it's certainly made life a bit more challenging than it needs to be.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I think we'll get an opportunity to touch on some of those industry-wide challenges when we talk to some of you, talk about some of your articles as well. Now, I think Joe Seph's really is known, though, if we sort of go back to the brand and the products you guys make, I think you're really known for really interesting, innovative flavours. And you mentioned this actually a little bit when you talked about how the brand started, that it's, about offering flavours like a goat's cheese popcorn, which is sort of quite eye-catching, I think, even today. And I had a look at your website before our chat just to kind of refresh my knowledge on the range. And I thought, God, you do even more flavours than I had remembered. How much do you do? How many flavours do you do at the moment? And where do you tend to get inspirations for flavours from?
You know what? I've lost count. I should know the answer to that question. It's roughly 80 flavours.
Wow, 80.
80. We have a lot of different flavours, and and a lot of that comes down to so pre-COVID, we were about to do a bit of a reassessment of the size of that range and whether and the scale of it is quite as sensible as it is. And then COVID hit and our direct-to-consumer business sort of blew up. And having the extended range was a huge benefit for us in terms of attracting people to joeandsephs.co.uk and in terms of keeping them excited about the range and kind of trying different flavours and different options. So there is a bit of tidying up there needed, but actually the kind of concept of having a very large range works very well for us, and operationally is something that is very manageable the way we've built the business and the processes. But in terms of inspiration, it comes from all sorts. Originally, it was very much what was in my dad's kitchen, and kind of his kind of food brain. Every time we go out for a meal, thinking, "Oh, that could work really well in popcorn," or not. There was a good amount of kind of buyers in supermarkets or other sort of distribution requesting flavours and going, "Wouldn't it be great if?"
Oh, interesting.
Which has driven a good amount of development. And then I'd say the third kind of pillar of it has been brand partnerships as well. So, for example, we've worked with some amazing brands over the years, the latest being 007, James Bond. And of course, there was only one flavour we could possibly do for that, which was a dry martini, popcorn popped, not stirred, and that was, it had to be that way, or it wasn't going to be a successful collaboration. So
I'm so interested in that, and we'll get to talk about your 007 collaboration in a second, because I'm really interested in how that came about. But you mentioned also, because of the setup and the way you guys work operationally, that actually having an 80 strong range is manageable, which on the face of it seems like it'd be impossible to handle for a small brand. Can you just give us a bit of a sense of how do you guys make that work? Do you keep everything in stock permanently and produce everything permanently, or is it much more produced to demand as and when orders come in?
It slightly depends, but because of the way because we manufacture, we're able to essentially chop and change that plan fairly easily. It's much easier to plan it a week out, but it can be chopped and changed quite easily. And all of the different popcorn that we have is really it's almost packed to order. So we'll produce to a kind of minimum forecast, but we'll pack to order. And so we're never really in a situation where we don't have any popcorn of a particular flavour to pack in, so whichever format it might be. It just needs kind of converting into one of our jars or bags or whichever it might be. So, and in that way, we make and also the way that we've designed the packaging is such that we don't need to hold specific packaging of every single flavour, because there are some kind of generic bits to the packaging that mean that actually the unique elements are quite small and few and far between. So. It certainly makes it a bit more challenging than it needs to be, but it's a great point of difference.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So on that point of some of the brand partnerships that you've entered into, and you mentioned the W07 dry martini popcorn, that film, of course, very famously got delayed because of COVID. So was that a bit of a heart-stopping moment for you guys? How were you sitting on lots of dry martini popcorn going, God, please just release that film? Or how were you affected by that?
Yeah, we definitely got caught out, and it was. I mean, because it came pretty. I think the original release date was April. I think what COVID lockdowns all sort of started
Hmm.
March time. Um, so we had. I mean, actually, it was worse than that. We had kind of popcorn on its way to retailers all over cinemas
Oh,
and retailers all over Europe. So there was a lot of recalls and cancelled orders, etc. But the fortunate, which in the short term, with everything else going on, was quite painful to sort of deal with. However, what was great was it spurred us on to we need to sell this and put even more momentum behind our direct to consumer kind of push at the time than maybe we had even thought about before. So and we did. We managed to clear it all.
wow. And when you are looking for brand partnerships, and as you said, the 007 is just the latest example, why are those partnerships so important to you? And how do you tend to approach selecting the right brand partner that would work with your brand?
Why are they important? They're important because as a smaller brand, um, we need to um, work with partners who are larger and able to uh, help us get our brand message out there.
Mm.
And if you can find the right partner that actually kind of aligns really nice with your brand and what you're trying to achieve, then it's a bit of a win-win for both brands, and in particular for the smaller of the two brands. Um, and so that's very much been our strategy over the years. We've done a lot of collaborations with different brands, and um, all have been some of my favourite things to work on. But also have really taken our brand into a new customer demographics. So, for example, a collaboration with BrewDog, when we launched that, popcorn was predominantly purchased and eaten by women. It was not a male product in terms of who was buying it. And our collaboration with BrewDog helped us take Joe and Seth into a more of a male demographic. And obviously that was a good number of years ago, and over the years we've seen that grow and grow. So that's the kind of the main reason behind it. How do we go about selecting partners? They've got to really align with what our brand is, and our brand is premium. We love to kind of do things a bit cheekily, a bit differently. We are small and we can take advantage of that nimbleness. But fundamentally, the finished product has to taste fantastic. Our Jones is all about taste. We've won over 70 great taste awards now, and that for us is really what we're trying to make Joe and Seth's. When you eat one of our products, we want you to go, "Wow, that tastes fantastic." And so, if the partnership helps us in that aim by giving us an awesome ingredient or kind of inspiring kind of flavor, or even a talking point, that we really like.
And now that the film has finally been released and is in cinemas, are you finding that you've seen a considerable uplift in sales already? How's it working out so far?
It's difficult. Often with partnerships, it's really difficult to measure. But I would say of all the partnerships, this one is the one that, for a variety of different reasons, sort of was always going to be fairly predictable, which was it was going to be quite successful, I think, in terms of what it achieved. And yes, it's performed very, very well. And but for us, it's not just about the sales value that comes with it. It's about the brand. And for
Hmm.
at the premiere of this film at the Royal Albert Hall, the 400,000 people in there, including the royal family and every member of the cast, had a bag of it on their seat
Right.
and were tucking into it during that film. So while they were, and post COVID, everyone is very looking for that kind of that special moment to talk about, and to be a part of 5,000 people's kind of special moments at that moment in time. and them to be consuming Joe and Seth's at that point, I think is incredibly powerful. And things like that really do help to over the years have really helped to grow a brand.
Absolutely, and of course there is a natural fit, isn't there, with a film and popcorn and cinema, and you're obviously already very well distributed in cinemas as well. Now, I want to move on to your articles, because you've picked some really interesting industry developments for us to talk about. Before we do that, just give us a sense of what you're like as a reader. What publications do you read regularly, and what types of stories are you typically drawn towards?
I would say I used to read an awful lot more than I do now. Now I kind of distill it all down on a Sunday morning. And there's two reasons for that. One is my work life is incredibly busy, and my second is I have a 7-month-old baby who, frankly, any more than 10 minutes of me playing with my phone and the phone, he's figured out how to grab it and throw it on the floor. So my amount of reading I get done these days is unfortunately far less. But I would say there's two publications that are still I read cover to cover every week, and that would be the Grocer and the Times. The Times on Sunday and Saturday. And I think because I think in our industry, if you're not reading the Grocer, of course, there's certainly things that you won't be aware of, and I think it's incredibly important. And from the Times, the sort of what the articles that will kind of catch my eye. I'm always interested in kind of brands that are fundraising, because certain things will kind of come as their next stage. They're going to be out there recruiting. They're going to be launching MPD probably within 6 to 12 months. They're going to be spending money on it. It's quite interesting to kind of see that coming. I also think it's really interesting reading about. I find kind of the interviews with some of the leaders really interesting. I think it's always something you can take from how other people are doing things that you can then put in place in your own business. And that I always will kind of tend to read these articles and send an email to myself with kind of 2 or 3 thoughts that I need to change or think about.
Oh, that's very well organised. I'm
the only way
I'm
I
impressed.
Remember anything. Lots of emails from myself. That's all I do.
It's as long as there's a system, I think that's what matters. And there's no shortage of sort of industry issues to talk about at the moment as well. It's obviously an incredibly busy time for everyone, but for the industry in particular. What you have picked as our first article to talk about is from The Drum, and it's about Christmas shopping trends. The headline is "Christmas shoppers start earlier, but half don't think we'll have a normal celebration." And just to give a little bit of context for listeners, so this is an article reporting on a survey by eBay. It's from a little while ago, but touches on trends that I think have been recurring really for over the past few weeks and months. Lots of very familiar themes that we're talking about. So shoppers starting to stock up earlier than usual. We've had quite a lot of retailers talk about how things like frozen turkey crowns, I think at Aldi last week, are already up much more than they would have been normally at this time of year. And from this survey, 41% of shoppers are expecting to be fully prepped for Christmas even before December, which makes me feel slightly panicky. I'm definitely not in that 41%. But there is also still quite a bit of uncertainty and anxiety around what exactly Christmas will look like, which is what that headline refers to, with just 50% believing a traditional Christmas will be possible this year. Adam, you mentioned earlier gifting is a really important part of your range, of your business. You do limited edition flavours, special flavours for Christmas as well. Just give us a sense of how important Christmas is to the business in the grand scheme of things. And therefore, what are your expectations around how shoppers are going to behave this year?
I think this article is really interesting because, to answer your question, Christmas is an important part of our selling season. We're very strong in gifting and at Christmas, but in addition, from a brand perspective, it's one of our biggest opportunities as a brand to get Joe and Seth's into lots of people's homes who wouldn't necessarily buy a bag of popcorn day in, day out. It's a different occasion, and so it's a great way of getting a different consumer trying Joe and Seth's. And so it's important on a number of levels. And the reason I think this is really interesting is I certainly feel personally that this will be the kind of the biggest Christmas that we've known in certainly in my lifetime. If all continues to play out and stay positive, because I think people just want to have an event that they can plan for, entertain, and spend money for, frankly. And there was a part of this article that said that the 30% of consumers are planning to up their budgets for presents and partying. And I think this links neatly into a lot of what we're seeing, and I think the industry is seeing, is that Christmas has been just pulled forward dramatically. I mean, we've never delivered as much stock as early as we have for Christmas, as we have this year. And we've also found that people are spending, where consumers are spending with us, they're spending much more than they would have done as well previously. So the two trends of it kind of it looking like it's going to be a big Christmas and people planning earlier and spending more is definitely we're seeing coming through, and that's starting to play out. We're seeing with kind of shortages everywhere and lots of kind of supply chain challenges. What I think is really interesting as well, though, is from a from an occasion perspective, I do think indulgence is going to be huge at Christmas. And so from a brand, we are an indulgent brand. We are kind of, well, I think we're going to talk about other forms of indulgence, but we are an indulgent brand, and so for us, it's definitely going to play well for us, I think, this Christmas.
And I like what you were saying there around shoppers really planning early and stocking early, and the impact that's had on your own sales already. As you said, in some instances, that early planning is motivated to an extent by concerns around availability and a sense of, well, I better, sort this out now before everyone else has bought all the popcorn. Has that created availability issues or issues with sort of ingredients, packaging, any kind of supply chain problems for you, or have you been able to manage those changes?
I guess we are the old swan analogy at the moment. Everything looks pretty great. We're delivering almost on time to all of our customers and in full. But underneath, it has been very, very challenging the last few months in particular with supply chain. From a supply chain perspective, deliveries, packaging delays, costs, everything's going up in price. Everything's taking longer to source. Suppliers who historically would have been, you wouldn't even have to chase them for a delivery. You're really having to check to make sure they're going to deliver for you and not give that capacity to someone else. So it has been very, very challenging. I'm really proud that we are in the place that we are and kind of doing record numbers. But it is underneath. It has been very tough. Yeah. And I think that's common across the industry at the moment. Certainly every meeting I have, everyone is sort of pulling their hair out a little bit and has some challenge or the other.
Yeah, and certainly I think pretty much any food and drink brand I've had on the podcast or I've spoken to recently, I think would echo that as well. What's the biggest headache for you at the moment when it comes to those supply chain issues? What's really either gone up in cost or what's become really difficult to source?
The going up in cost, containers, so for our export business, has gone up dramatically, and the time. If I'm sending a container to America, it used to take not the time on the sea, but the time at the other end. It used to get offloaded straight away, and off it goes. And now you're getting hit with demurrage charges at the other end, where you've got to pay, even though it's not your fault that it's taken so long to get it off the ship, which is crazy. The concept I can't get my head around at all. And then you can't get lorries to kind of take it. So the whole kind of logistics. In particular, sea freight, air freight costs are unbelievable, and there are kind of specific shortages around kind of packaging or price increases on everything really. But and I think this is the biggest challenge that I think SMEs are going to have at the moment is what do you do with your pricing? It's only so long that we can absorb these sorts of slightly scary price increases. But like every SME, we don't want to pass on those increases because we want to be growing our brand, growing our distribution, not risking that at all. So no doubt that's a challenge that all of us and all of us as a kind of group of smaller brands are debating.
Absolutely. I mean, it's arguably a little bit easier, isn't it, if you are a premium brand where, consumer sort of price sensitivity is possibly a little bit different to, an everyday essential.
£1 price point, exactly. You can't go to £1.5.
But still, people, pay attention to prices. Of course, it would have an impact. Have you found that retail buyers are relatively supportive in those conversations, or is it tough to even start talking about that?
The only learning I'm having this year is there's far fewer what you're going to do to reduce your price conversations. I think everyone, probably buyers have had enough of trying to have those conversations. I could be wrong, but certainly they've been far less common this year because I think the reality is there's nowhere really to go in that direction. So I think as a whole, I think people are fairly receptive to it because they're starting to see it in their own. Petrol costs are record highs, I think, and Christmas. A lot of Christmas products are going up in price. But I think those conversations we'll know the answer probably over the next few months when they come to a conclusion in some shape or form.
Yeah, certainly the fact that it's happening across the industry essentially I think helps matters. It's not like it's individual brands or categories trying to push that. Let me take you on to the next article, which I think it keeps us in fairly sort of high profile issues. This is some research from Mintel, and I think it's quite interesting just how much consumer research actually is getting published at the moment. It really feels like there's a real need, isn't there, to stay very close to what's happening with consumer needs as we come out of COVID. But this is a piece from Mintel. It's focused on the US actually, but it touches on lots of trends that I think are just as relevant in a UK context. So it looks at snacking and the rise of permissible indulgence in particular. You already touched on this. You guys are an indulgent brand. We're having a lot of discussion about health at the moment. So I was very interested to see how you are approaching that whole topic. But again, for listeners, this Mintel research essentially looked at how consumers are trying to square, on the one hand, growing interest in health, a greater desire to be healthier and choose healthier options, and also at the same time wanting snacks in particular that are indulgent and that taste great. And what they found was 78% of consumers believe snacking can be part of a healthy diet. 69% want snacks that balance health and taste. And they're also looking at, essentially as those snacking occasions broaden as well, that consumers are often torn between wanting that indulgence and also wanting to make healthier choices. Especially, I think, in the wake of COVID, health, obesity, these are all issues that we're talking about quite a lot. How do you approach that as an indulgent brand, and where do you think you can fit in with consumers that are torn between those two instincts, wanting indulgence but also wanting a better for you choice?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's something we've debated a lot over the years is what actually, should you kind of try and make even lower calorie, lower fat, lower type kind of products, or actually are we, if our core message is about taste, which it is, we're not willing to compromise on that at all. And so it means using the best ingredients, sometimes the most indulgent, to make the best tasting products. Now, all that being said, our calorie, because we don't use oil to pop our popcorn, we use air and a variety of other things, means actually the calories are pretty good. But as a brand, it's for me, it's really important that we focus on the fact that portion control and servings is a way to control the level in which you indulge with Joe Seph, as opposed to compromising the product to create something that isn't as fantastic as kind of what it is now. And I think permissible indulgence is a really interesting kind of phrase because it is that it's kind of it's something that you consider yourself is allowable. And for me personally, everyone has their own view, I think, as to what that might look like. For me, that means cleaner ingredients, and kind of doing everything with some level of control, as opposed to kind of eating huge amounts of products where you can't really pronounce the ingredients. And therefore that's what I think a lot of what we do and what we see within Joe and Seph's is very much that. It's about, we do resealable on our sharing size packs are resealable, allowing people to come back and have more later on, and also the ingredients are kind of all things that you should know, and or certainly in a lot of people's kitchen cupboards. So and that's been for us the kind of the focus, and I don't see it changing even with the onset of HFSS, which is obviously coming thick and fast. There is a need for kind of more that won't change our strategy. HFSS really, from a brand perspective, is going to stop a lot of brands promoting on kind of gondola ends. And as a smaller brand, I don't have the budget to spend the money to promote on gondola end. And so really in the last 11 years, we've always driven the consumer down the aisle to look at our fixture on the shelf and buy because they like the look of the product and it's appealing to them. And so if anything, HFSS should mean that more people are driven down the aisle to look for premium indulgent products, not less. And if anything, hopefully our sales will improve as part of that. That's how I'm currently rationalising HFSS in my head anyway. But I'm sorry, I've taken you totally off permissive indulgence.
No, but it's absolutely relevant, and I was really keen to ask you about HFSS. So I'm very glad that you've brought us onto that already. And I think your point about being a smaller brand, not really going for that secondary space in the first place, I think is well made. Do you think though that there will be an impact in terms of what retail buyers are looking for? Because there's obviously a lot of pressure to make ranges healthier and to prioritize healthier choices, healthy NPD. What's your sense on how that's going to affect your chances of growing the brand and getting more listings?
Definitely. I think, if I was a supermarket buyer now and having conversations with them, with various buyers over the last few weeks, there is a kind of rush to HFSS products that they can put on promotion ends and various things like that. And so that combined with availability challenges and supply chain challenges is putting pressure on NPD and on smaller brands who don't fit that requirement, because they're looking to put as much products on a shelf as possible with the brands that they know are going to sell and are going to fit those requirements. So there is yes, I definitely agree that in the short term there is going to be kind of a slightly I think it's going to be a bit of a panic to buy the right products to fill the space that's needed, if indeed it launches. This kind of comes in as planned next year. But I think longer term, or medium term anyway, the concept of having premium brands that don't need to be promoted, multi-buy promoted, don't need to be gondola end, and that offer kind of points of difference in aisle, I think will be a real growth area for buyers, because actually there's only so many consumers who will want to buy those kind of healthier products, and so where are all the consumers who don't want to going to go? And so I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out, because every person I sort of will speak to, and we'll have a bit of discussion on, we're all kind of there's a real unknown of where it lands. But the kind of logic to me says that there has to be a role in supermarkets for smaller brands and challenger brands. Maybe the place for those often might become more HFSS because they're going to be much more nimble to be able to create those sorts of products and don't have a legacy of brands products that they can't make HFSS compliant. But I think where there are premium brands who are challenger brands, that the logic says that there needs to be that point of difference in aisle as well. So yeah, I and certainly so far the conversations have been quite positive in that way. But who knows how the next 12 months goes? I think there's a lot that hasn't quite played out yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the only thing I would add in terms of what you're saying about the role of challenger brands, I suppose there's also still going to be a role for brands that are just very clear that they are an indulgent choice.
Yeah.
I think consumers are not confused that they're buying a treat when they're buying one of your products. Yeah. I think that's also part of it, isn't it? That you're not suggesting that it's something it isn't.
I totally agree, and I think what's going to be very interesting is in aisle front of packs had started to become quite in confectionery and crisp snacks, nuts in particular, had become quite calorie focused and lots of healthier messages. I wonder to what extent brands will drop those messages because actually it becomes a bit. And it becomes much more of a split between you go for your healthy stuff there and you go for your more indulgent stuff here. And actually, if you're trying to, I always believe if you're somewhere stuck between the two, you're never going to succeed. So those brands that kind of try and do both on the front of pack, I think, might struggle a bit more. It's a very interesting. It's another period of change on top of all the other changes the last few years. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out.
It's going to keep, I think, everyone very busy.
And I think the only other thing I would say is that the one thing that COVID has done for Joe Seph's and a lot of smaller brands, it's been a huge focus on D2C again. And so we have over the course of sort of 12 to 18 months, we've reached 350,000 consumers. Individual consumers have had a package of Joe Seph's through the post, which is a huge, for a brand like us, is a huge number of consumers. And we are able to reach all of those different consumers with our messaging now. And so when we do launch into supermarkets or into a new retailer, we're far more able to succeed and talk about our messaging in a lot more detail because we've got those details. One of the biggest challenges of HFSS is going to be the lack of ability to talk about your brand, your story, and your product in aisle. And so anything that brands can do to reach consumers, to get them into that aisle, to buy the products on the shelf, I think is going to be a huge part of it, and will make the rate of sale much more realistic and achievable.
Absolutely, it'll stay very, very interesting. I think if we have
you can tell I'm Mr. Positive though, Julia. I'm positive.
But you have, I mean, you have to be though, right? Because you need to kind of obviously respond to what's happening in the market. And you guys have done NPD. I mean, you've got a sort of popcorn bars as well, haven't you? That are much more, that are calorie controlled. Correct. And I think 140 calories, if I remember correctly. So there are obviously things that you can do to kind of respond to some of that, but ultimately you need to believe in your brand and you need to believe in what it stands for, and that there is a way to tell its story still.
Yeah, I think so. And the kind of the fundamentals of your brand, I think, Joe Seph's to one side, the fundamentals are if you produce a great tasting product that people love to eat, there's always a place for it somewhere. It's just going to be about adapting and changing and reformatting or reformatting the size, shape, or price point to be able to succeed.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of adapting, changing and reformatting, we're going to talk about yet another big piece of change, but this time on the retail side. So we're going to talk a bit about retail tech and Tesco's new checkout-free store. You've picked an article from The Grocer. The headline is Tesco's Get-Go checkout-free shopping experience. It's one of those really nice picture-led articles where you actually get to see what the shop looks like on the inside. It was very helpful. This, again, just for context, is Tesco's first checkout-free store that's open to the public. It's called Get-Go. It's in Holborn in London. And the way essentially it works is customers check in via the the Tesco.com app. At the entrance, they pick up whichever products they want. Their movements and product choices are tracked through cameras and on-shelf weight sensors, and then the payment is done through the app afterwards. No need to queue, no need to check out, no need to scan anything. Why did their story catch your attention, Adam? And what do you think the implications of this checkout-free tech are ultimately for brands like yours?
Why did it catch my attention? I love tech, and I love tech in FMCG. It makes it. I think anything that it changes the experience, makes the experience a bit different and interesting. I think I love that kind of stuff. And why I particularly love this one is that Tesco are having a go, because suddenly it takes it from Amazon, who we know are leading in a number of areas, but you never really know whether Amazon are going to. This is just a sort of pilot or something. You never know how serious it could be for the industry. I think until one of the bigger guys and the legacy players kind of has a go, and so the fact Tesco doing it is really cool. It's really exciting. What I love about what I did do actually on this article was I then did a bit of a search on Twitter, because Twitter is always a good one to have a look at, see what people are saying about it. And I particularly found I thought what was quite interesting was it doesn't sound particularly frictionless. It sounds quite difficult to get onto the app and kind of get your details set up and get started. But once you're in, it sounds like a pretty fun experience. But I think what's really interesting about it, and so yeah, I think as a concept, it's really exciting, and personally, I can't stand those self-service machines that always insist on having an error whenever I decide to use them. So anything that moves us away from those is a positive development in my eyes. But what I think is particularly interesting about these stores is what it will mean for the shopping experience, because my understanding, the way they work is you have to follow a set path, so that the scanners can kind of pick you up, and you can't backtrack, I believe, and therefore in terms of the way things are laid out, you're actually as a consumer having to follow a bit of a journey, which through the store to be able to get what you want. And I think so from my perspective as a smaller brand, in theory that means that I'm going to get a lot more people going down the aisle where my product is displayed, and a lot more people hopefully experiencing it and getting the opportunity to try it and buy it. And we are actually stocked in the Amazon stores, so it's quite exciting, but I've got no data. I've got no visibility.
I was just about to ask you, has it worked so far?
Absolutely no visibility at all to be able to give you anything insightful. But what I'm interested in is, so first of all, I think that the journey will make it very interesting. But the second thing I think is really interesting is if I am a consumer who can't stand those machines, will it mean that people increase their average basket size and spend more and try more things because actually they don't have the hassle of dealing with these checkouts at the end? And I don't know the answer, but I think it's really interesting and what it's going to do to the industry if it does take off, not only in terms of kind of what kind of the levels of staffing needed in terms of restocking the shelves. I believe is a lot more complex, and it has to be done in a certain sort of methodical way. But I just love the fact that actually the retail store experience is going to evolve, and we've seen kind of the bigger format stores struggling a bit more and needing to fill their space with other restaurants and things over the years, and now actually we're going to end up with a load of smaller format stores that do things a bit differently.
I like what you were saying there about managing the shopper journey. I think that's a really interesting point. It's sort of it's worked for IKEA, hasn't it? In kind of funneling people through a particular journey. Do you think, though, that if people don't have to check out, the whole experience becomes faster, more efficient, that actually the amount of time people get to spend making choices will reduce as well, because they're in that sort of super efficient, I'm just getting this done mode?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I think it also becomes very soulless, and the sort of ability of interacting with people, kind of giving tasters or whatever it might be, becomes all a bit more challenging. So yeah, I do think there'll be less. You're right. There probably would be less dwell time. But then I think ultimately these stores are probably currently designed for very high footfall kind of lunch locations.
It's a Tesco Express, isn't it?
Yeah, where people are in a hurry, they want to get back to work very quickly. We've done sampling in tube stations and mainline train stations, and it's impossible because people are going from A to B and not wanting to stop. What would be very interesting is if this was just a version of this was in a much larger format store where, personally speaking, I'll still go and dwell and explore because I quite like that as an experience. But anything that can make that experience a bit more interesting is exciting.
Yeah, and I suppose it could just be one way of actually driving further polarization in terms of the kind of shopping experiences that we're looking at. So the super efficient, Tesco Express, Sainsbury's Local, you just want to, get something done and have it be as frictionless as possible. And then at the other end of the spectrum, something that's much more about in-store theatre and really maximises a dwell time. And it's probably the stuff in the middle that's going to be a little bit harder to make work potentially in future.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing I'd say is if you look at the cinema industry, who for years have been under threat from kind of changes in viewing habits, and if you use that analogy with supermarkets in terms of Amazon deliveries and people free delivery, all this sort of stuff, cinemas have totally reinvented themselves to this 4DX. They do massive screens, all about the customer experience. That is the number one aim for a cinema right now. They know they're going to get you through the door if they can offer you an amazing experience and a great film. And actually, supermarkets, it's evolved, like you say, but it hasn't really had to jumpstart. It hasn't really been under threat as a kind of, I don't think, as a format. And so it's quite exciting because it starts, and maybe this isn't the final answer, maybe this isn't the right answer, but it starts to throw some interesting ideas and some smart people at a problem or at an opportunity that could be really cool.
Absolutely. Adam, we're out of time, but if listeners want to connect with you, want to learn more about the brand, where can they find you?
As a brand, we are on all the usual social media channels at Joe and Seph, JoeAndSeph. And personally, I'm on LinkedIn. Is my go-to. So please make sure you try some Joe and Seph for Christmas this year. You will enjoy indulging permissibly, and that's even English. And I hope everyone's had the opportunity to come across us over the years.
Brilliant. Adam, thank you so much for coming on the show, and thanks for a great conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it useful. If you did, please consider giving the Pick List a 5-star rating on whichever platform you're listening and leave a review. It tells me you're enjoying the show and would like it to continue, and it helps me reach more listeners. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at juliaglotz.com and on thepicklist.co.uk. And if you'd like more thought-provoking reads for your personal reading list, please subscribe to The Trim, my free weekly newsletter at juliaglotz.com/newsletter. See you next time.